a formal statement made by representatives of the Yugioh franchise in 2016 regarding Dark Side of Dimensions. That's what you're getting. The movie hasn't been, nor will it be, censored or cut for the theatrical or home video release. The only changes in the English version are English cards and signs appearing in the film. If the Japanese version had been rated by the MPAA, it would receive the same rating, because it's the same film. Yeah, that ended up being an outright lie. Well, it took us a lot longer for us to reach it than I wanted, but it is finally time to discuss Yu-Gi-Oh's 20th anniversary movie, a potential continuation of the manga, and how I actively dislike it. Though my sour tune to it shouldn't be a surprise to many, as I've just grown a massive loathing towards anniversary events that bring back legacy characters, as the grand majority of them for content I have been a fan of end up being trash fires with regards to either their story, the mangling of the setting and lore, how they treat those characters, or the character assassination that takes place to justify that story. Most of which goes against the actual desires and expectations of the people most invested in seeing more content with those characters involved. And it's not exactly a once or twice off thing. I have a grand list of franchises where if they were brought back for an anniversary event, special, or continuation, then I end up deeply disliking that new content, which tarnished the tales I did once enjoy. And it's actually easier these days to catalog the ones that haven't screwed it up. Trigun Badlands Rumble, Mazinger Z Infinity, Ten Gokaiger, and for that matter most times when Naruhisa Arakawa does such continuation specials. Gao Gaigar vs. Better Man. To an extent, there are definitely a lot of problems with that crossover. .GU Reconnection. Again, I have problems with it, but it's otherwise fine. Studio Trigger's Gridman anime. And freaking Red Dwarf. These are all continuations or anniversary events for series I am a fan of that, despite many of their flaws or critiquable elements, ultimately endeavored to do right by the story and characters which fans enjoyed, or were harmless at their absolute worst. But those are the only ones that come to mind in this, though to be fair, I could be missing like one or two others that I just didn't remember when writing or recording this review. And to be clear, if it's something that regularly gets continuations because of the possibility to tell new stories with them, like say, Lupin the Third, or was an adaptation of content that existed previously that wasn't given a chance until later, like Get a Robo Arc or Bleach 1000-Year Blood War, those don't count for this. My problem is stories that had a definitive ending to their tale that years and years down the line haven't decided that there needs to be a brand new epilogue chapter or attempt to continue the setting, and how frequently they end up screwed up or undermining the prior material by how it does them wrong. Franchise reboots can and have been bad too, but when you get a bad reboot, you just discard it as it doesn't reflect the old material. The hate against it stays with the reboots. But that doesn't work for these continuations, as they are directly connecting to that previous continuity, which affects reading and interpretation of the old content more directly with their contradictions, and thus goes a greater loathing for the entirety that just doesn't work for people anymore after that. Such as how I have not liked any new Star Trek or Star Wars content made since the J.J. Abrams films for both, as there's too many narrative, lore, logic, and character incongruities contrasting against their older material for me to be on board with what's been done with them. It's actually reached the point that Seth MacFarlane's The Orville more thematically represents the best of what Star Trek was than the actual Star Trek franchise has since the 2009 Trek film. And that's just examples from Western sci-fi stuff. You look over at Japanese series I've been a fan of, and you have disappointments like Digimon Adventure Tri and Kizuna, which repeatedly refuse to let the characters grow the fuck up and be responsible, and outright punish them for trying to do so. So what was done was not accepted. And the less said about Chiaki Konaka using Digimon tamers to promote extremist conspiracies, the better. You have things like Kamaru O's resurrection, which killed off the main character Eiji Hino, when the entire purpose of his story was about him finding value in life again and not sacrificing it so callously. Which is what that anniversary story ends up doing with him, and I fucking hate it. You have Dragon Ball Super, which ends up... Well, okay, Dragon Ball Super is not completely terrible. It actually does decent things with some of the characters, but has nonetheless screwed up or missed the landing on nearly every storyline it's tried to do, while leaving audiences not on board with what's been done with several fan favorites that have repeatedly been screwed over. And then there's Code Geass Lelouch of the Resurrection, which I will be doing a greater biopsy on in the future, but to keep it short, the film's fault lies in how it insists on doubling down on every bad decision made regarding that franchise, while refusing to fix the actual failures it does acknowledge, to basically redo everything everyone ever disliked about it. Basically, the shorthand for any of these revivals is if it uses Fukats, or as it's translated, Resurrection in its title, run. Run screaming, as it is almost guaranteed to be fucking bad. But nonetheless, this is the company Dark Side of Dimensions keeps with regards to extensions of concluded narratives. Frankly, it has more and more made me uninterested in seeing new additions to shows and films I was engaged with. Because I am just so tired of them being screwed up. And I am sick of being near universally furious at them. They frequently appear to not care about nor understand the merits of what they were messing with, what potential stories could have been told had they approached their tales in a different way, or what fans would have happily embraced, leading to their popular rejection. For good writers that analyze the merits of or know well a prior tale can succeed in telling a new, unexpected story in a way fans will accept. It's just, a lot of these continuations don't make that attempt, or the egos and biases of their makers get in the way, especially if they fall prey to previous problems to further exasperate them. And in Dark Side of Dimensions' case, what it attempted was also hindered by its localization changes. For the English dub of this film had much of the story and characterization of it rewritten to conform to the dub of the anime, which was, as I have shown, heavily divergent in story and characterization, which ended up even further compounding the errors the film itself was making. And thus, despite official representatives saying that this would not happen for the film's release, it still did. The 4K media dub of the film explicitly glossing over the specific power and goals of the antagonist faction present in the film, and the grand majority of the metaphysical concepts that had already been lore for the franchise, consequently dumbing down the film immensely to the point the true plot was not understandable in the dub version. And this was done because both hinged themselves upon concepts that originate in foreign religion, and 4K's long-standing policy regarding anything with foreign religious association is it is not to be included where possible, thus leading to the official representatives of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise who made that public statement to speak an outright, though, let's be fair, likely unintentional, lie. This was not made any better by the home release of the film, as it did not include a proper subtitle based on the Japanese script of the film that matched the Japanese audio track to provide what 4K Media had ripped out. It solely had closed captions that matched the script rewritten for the dub. This was blamed as a mistake by Anchor Bay, the company that printed the home release, as they did not get the proper subtitle script in time to include them for the printing of the discs. But even if it had been, such would not have fixed the problem. Why? Because, once more, despite Konami officials and representatives explicitly saying such would not be done, 4K Media edited the movie to conform to their altered narrative of the dub, and some scenes present in the original film are wholesale missing. And as a consequence, the official subtitles for the movie, also made by 4K, are awful, and still entirely screw up the actual metaphysical concepts the film is trying to utilize, as they are not based in Egyptian mythology, but the philosophical principles of Hinduism from India. Made worse, and this part actually being Anchor Bay's fault, but the master version of their release was not properly formatted, meaning when it was copied to all the subsequent mass production discs, every single one of them had severe defects. Sections of the film so corrupted they were unplayable. In essence, the Western import and release of the film, from start to finish, was so messed up as to leave the entire work a defective, irreparable product. While a mass recall of the disc was performed to fix some of this, to this very day, over 6 years after the film was distributed in the West, you cannot purchase a copy of the movie without buying the fraudulent version. Meaning, the only reliable way to see the movie is to use the fan-subbed release, as those are unedited, and at least, if they are not perfect, attempt to more conform to the movie's transcript. Which brings it back around to what I said when I started this. The owners of the franchise don't go after the fan translators because they show more genuine care than those that have stolen the IP rights. And if 4K Media was the beginning and end of the problems with this, I likely wouldn't have avoided the film as long as I have. Made worse with even critiquing the film being how Kazuki Takahashi died a hero in 2022 trying to save swimmers from a riptide. It feels genuinely wrong to criticize a work I vehemently disagree with on a fundamental level from a man who seemed honest and genuine to his morals and intentions, and before writing this film had been more than content with what he had built, helping the main writers of the sequel series brainstorm ideas and help build out the background lore of them, create new cards alongside Konami's R&D teams for the game, and if rumor is to be believed, outright rejected the unnecessary censorship of several of his card artworks. In specific, Maji Maji Magician Girl, which has still not seen release in the TCG despite there being absolutely nothing offensive that needs to be censored. And yet, I feel the mistakes of this film do begin with the decisions he made for it, central to that being to officially set this film to only be compatible with some version of the manga, despite the contradiction that decision itself invokes with regards to the rest of the franchise and its continuity, as what we see of the film is not compatible with the original manga at all either. The original manga and anime, with exception to Seto Kaiba's invention of the solid vision hologram system and primitive virtual technology interface, is working upon a technological level equivalent to the year that the story was primarily set in, 1996. The original Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters anime was slightly looser in that regard, showing more advanced forms of technology on occasion existing in the universe, but still in a limited capacity, most centrally seen in the show's virtual world filler arc. Whereas in Dark Side of Dimensions, the tech level of the setting has taken such an extreme leap that it instantaneously surpasses what was expected of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, which is set in the 2030s, and has more in common with what is seen of Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V. So the easiest way to have explained such discontinuity, instead of saying it's in canon with some version of the manga, would have been to say it is the fifth alternate dimension created by the dimensional split that occurs in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V's backstory. For those who haven't seen or remember, to prevent an entity with immense power from causing a calamity, the individual who stopped them was forced to split all of existence across paralleling dimensions, segregating the history of the universe along separate tracks that came to be associated with the primary summoning mechanics of the Duel Monsters card game: Fusion, Exceed, Synchro, and the new to the series Pendulum Summon. The Pendulum Dimension initially believed to be the one associated with the standard system, aka no extra deck at all, which it was not. That one was missing. This all being partially based on all the multi-dimensional lore that was already present in the franchise thanks to previous series. And this is all something Takahashi would have known, as he helped the writers create much of that lore. And as the franchise was celebrating 20 years existing, it caused Arc V to have characters from each of the sequel series come in as alternate dimension counterparts, as this splitting of space-time had caused the entire history of the original world to rerun itself, albeit with them possessing anachronisms of the original history, such as alternate universe Jack Atlas's Red Dragon Archfiend Scarred Right being a version of the monster that had recovered from injuries it had gained from Yusei's Junk Warrior in the finale of Yu-Gi-Oh! 5Ds, and all these dimensions sharing the same technological level that was present in Arc V's backstory. And since a similar tech level from Arc V is shown in Dark Side of Dimensions, and the solicitation for the movie likewise mentions that there is something wrong with the dimensions of the universe, the assumption going into the film was it would be working off of this similar rerun of time premise by which to tell a new original story. And doing so would make up for Arc V's production quality just straight up nosediving during the same period as the movies make, like had similarly happened with 5Ds regarding Bonds Beyond Time. And then the movie released, and Kazuki Takahashi announced the film was solely a direct canon sequel to the manga. He had a built-in excuse to explain any discontinuity and take the movie on its own merit, and he's just straight up wasted it. I feel like Konami may have had a hand in not just enticing him to come back to do the 20th anniversary event, but to do things this way to promote the upcoming Duel Links mobile game, as that's much of what the film and its tie-in manga prequel, Transcend Game, ends up doing anyways. And as it is, the Transcend Game manga ends up acting in contradiction to both the prior manga with its plotting, but also the plot of the movie as well. Everything sacrificed to promote Duel Links seems to have sabotaged the franchise when you think about it. And Transcend Game starting this plot actually makes it worse. For if you're deliberately making it so you need supplementary material to understand the plot of your movie, then you are failing as a storyteller. I don't care who you are. Some of these continuation movies, an example in Japan, start out by handing the people going into the theaters pamphlets with all these details of what came right before the movie that were in no previous canon content. And those movies that do that are not succeeding in what they're attempting. It's another reason I actually hate Revolution of the Resurrection. It does that. And in turn, if what is in Transcend Game was that essential to explaining the movie, it should have been in the movie to begin with. And this whole sequence of events is not made any better for me, as instead of making the story about Yugi and how he takes focus and moves on, it is instead a story about the absence of a Tem in the wake of him being laid to rest, which is actually a different thing entirely. And this is not a story that appeals to me as a result because I don't care about a Tem. I never have. The one I gave a damn about was Yugi, was Seto, was Jonochi. A Tem started out as a story device spirit that expanded into his own character, and then took over everything. Yeah, he did a bunch of cool, amazing things, and a bunch of important events revolve around him, especially concerning the Millennium items. But the series' continual refusal to hold him accountable for his flaws and grow as a character when he was wrong just became irritating, as was the series not allowing Yugi to grow into his own because of how much he was superseded by a Tem. Had Yugi remained in control through more of their duels, had there been a better exchange of control and dynamics where one was more shown to hold the other up, like, say, what was done early in the manga or was done during Judai's graduation duel in GX, then that would have been a different matter entirely. But the central thing that I and others did not want from this film was for them to focus on even the question of bringing a Tem back. This isn't Code Geass, where the rejection of that series ending made its fandom unanimous in wanting the lead character revived in order to reverse the screw-up, only for the revival to make what was wrong worse. Oh no, a Tem's last moments were a perfect send-off, that the anime did better than the manga by having everyone that mattered to the story see him off to his rest to have closure. So an entire film built out of circle jerking around the idea of bringing him back because Kazuki Takahashi came to feel he did the ending wrong was not something made for me from the start, as it's already been done. And really, the film gets off on the wrong foot straight from its start. With 6 months after the end of the original Yu-Gi-Oh! Story, Seto Kaiba is excavating the collapsed ruins of Atem's tomb, where the ceremonial duel took place, attempting to reclaim the broken pieces of the Millennium Puzzle to restore Atem. This, of course, made no sense. Either way around it. In the anime, it didn't make sense because Seto got his closure from being present for the ceremonial duel at the end, where Yugi defeated Atem and laid him to rest. Seto, in the anime continuity, let go. And with Yugi defeating Atem, the rival he sought out as the strongest was still around. So if he wanted a duel, he'd pester Yugi for one in later tournaments, which, in both anime and the sequel manga continuities, we know already that he did. Hell, it was better for him that way, as now Yugi was no longer being reliant on the magic crutch that was the Millennium Puzzle, so Seto could face off against the person he wanted to from the start. In manga continuity, this don't make sense because Seto wasn't present for the ceremonial duel, would not know about these ruins nor where to find them, nor even should he care because Yugi is still around to challenge. As from everything presented, no one even told him about them laying Atem to rest, so there's no tangible distinction between them for him to fucking care. Though, I should clarify, there is dialogue in the film that does show that Seto has been informed about the ceremonial duel and its results. He still thinks Atem is trapped in the puzzle, and if the cast has made him have that assumption, then they come across as a lot bigger assholes than Seto is, as then Seto's actions are validated by this then becoming a rescue mission for someone that has been abandoned in a pit. It thus becomes as if he's saying, you talk about bond and friendship, but who are you to abandon a friend in a tomb? But it's never once framed like that in this case. However, despite the movie saying he knows about it, he never acts as if he does. So the story is outright contradicting itself from the start. He cannot recover the puzzle without knowing about the ceremonial duel, and yet if he knows about the ceremonial duel that exercised Atem from the puzzle, he should know that Atem is no longer in the goddamn puzzle unless Yugi explicitly left that part out. このパズルに眠る王の魂。貴様が再び千年パズルをその胸につけ、もう一人の遊戯を俺の前に呼び寄せるのだ。Thus, my problem is not necessarily the unnecessary forced vilification of Seto the film is performing. Oh, no. My problem is he has no reason at all to be doing this, or anything that subsequently comes from this if he has been given the knowledge to do it in the first place from those in the know. No valid reason at all. It is done solely to facilitate the plot of the rest of the film, only lacking any real cause for his motivations internally to the film, nor externally from the prior source material. It is an outright plot hole everything else is hinged upon, precisely because he is the one person that should not be doing or craving this. But because Takahashi refused to map those feelings onto the person who should have them, Seto is consequently the scapegoat token sacrificed to the cannon soldier. Transcend Game tried to explain this sudden drive from Seto via the creation of the VR game Duel Links. Again, why promotion of that game seems to have sabotaged everything else in the franchise, this tie-in even calling the game a creation that will create a universe unto itself. Which only goes to show how Takahashi and Konami did not seem to understand how VR MMOs actually work, as this is not Digimon nor even Log Horizon. You're not going to the power of the collective consciousness of video games stored in computer servers into being a real living universe unless you're utilizing a hell of a lot of black box technology and quantum computing, which I doubt Seto would have been exploiting, as that's just begging for a lawsuit or government crackdown, as happened in every other setting with VR MMO tech that did that. Regardless, inside Duel Links, Seto encounters a consciousness that is so far beyond his that he can't explain it, his eyes contextualizing that person as a Tem, due to one of the antagonists of the film appearing before him earlier and proclaiming, "You will never be king of this world." Seto prevented from making contact with a Tem through this method because the spirit of Kisara that still manifests as his Blue Eyes White Dragon prevents him from accidentally killing himself, thus purportedly setting off his quest in the film. Now, those words about being king are supposed to be in reference to the antagonist of the film, Diva, whose goal is to remake the world in his image if he cannot find a way to access a higher order dimension that he believes is paradise. But Transcend Game does not put such in those terms, and not made any better by dialogue that infers Seto wants to rule the world himself. However, this drive to be king was not Seto's central motivation as a character. It was always, at best, an incidental thing brought about from Seto's actual central drive to build the future and succeed and surpass himself. Because even if you factor in the entire cycle of reincarnation from Priest Seto affecting Kaiba's mind, a Tem in the ancient past entrusted the future to Seto for him to build when a Tem handed over ruling of their nation to Priest Seto upon his death. But this all ignores how even in the past, Pharaoh Seto did not want to be a king. And hell, saying Seto is being that overtly influenced by the regrets of a past life into killing himself is an even worse thing and increases how wrong this is by sheer magnitudes. The unfinished business between them that would act as this motivation would have in turn been the final confrontation depicted in the stone tablets. The anime interpretation of this switches around the placement of the details, but it's still ultimately the same, with Akhenaten possessing Priest Seto's body to use his own and attack a Tem in his final act freeing the possessed Seto before dying by intentionally losing to him, with the greatest regret by Priest Seto being that if Seto were to usurp a Tem's throne, which in previous scenes in the manga he explicitly said he did not want to do, then he would have wanted to have had one last, final, fair duel to act as proper closure over who should lead the way to the future. That regret subsequently carries on and informs Seto's reincarnation as Seto Kaiba, with it taking the form of Seto and Yugi's rivalry. And yet Seto never feels satisfied because from the beginning, his duels against Yugi are not fair because a Tem is overshadowing Yugi and manipulating the magic of the puzzle, or there is something else going on that makes their matches uneven. For if you pay attention to the entire length of the series, Seto never actually gets a fair game, fair duel out of a Tem before a Tem is gone. So if his character motivation is not about him ruling, but him surpassing his rival as driven by the subconscious connection to the regrets of a past life, well, again, Yugi's right over there! There's no need for him to create virtual, simulated versions or tear open a hole to the afterlife, which results in the question that damns the movie as it's never properly answered. Why can't Seto just get what he wants out of dueling Yugi? The single consistent thing about Seto Kaiba throughout all previous media is that he is pursuing the future, a better one he is using his own talents to create. He takes little stock in the past beyond it being the foundation by which to build a better future by avoiding the mistakes of that past. And in both the anime continuity and the sequel mangas, Seto working towards a brighter future built with light has nonetheless created the foundation of those lives we see in all the sequel media. And that likewise reflects well on Priest Seto. for Priest Seto honored the dead from the Millennium Conflict by building a better future in his own time. But as a consequence of this narrative, the vilification for Seto throughout this film is essentially incited by Seto suddenly not seeking a better future, but now chasing a forever lost past and severed connection. When again, they're right over there, and won't be found by putting back together an empty puzzle. If they had really told Seto about the ceremonial duel, then Seto would know that Atem is no longer in the puzzle, so he wouldn't end up seeking the damn thing out, and would be bugging Yugi himself for a game every now and then, as to seek the future is to say, until next time, instead of digging up someone's grave to change a decided and concluded past. The film is frustratingly self-aware of this walking contradiction they keep making throughout its events. And I'm stuck on this point because, what do you think the film does at its climax? And thus, the entire film is set in motion by an unjustified out-of-character action incited by one of the most intelligent characters in the franchise, spending the entire plot of it rolling around a fucking idiot ball, where he knows something that should stop his actions outright, and yet continually acts as if he doesn't. It's an idiot plot. A story that should have been prevented because the character committing the greatest sins of it should already know the information that is revealed to them at its climax that would have prevented the entire sequence of events from occurring. You could have genuinely cut and reformatted the entirety of Seto's storyline in this film to not have him act as an antagonistic imbecile, and would have been far better for it, with a single fundamental change to it. But we are not there yet. With Yugi and the gang, with them approaching graduation, they are echoing what GX and 5Ds have done with their characters, speculating on their paths for the future. Anzu still working towards studying dance abroad, Honda expecting to work for his dad who runs a factory, and Jonochi, who knows. Yeah, the movie also treats Jonochi like complete shit for bad comedy, and, well, let's face it, not a single moment of it in any way works. What's more compounding an error of the original series that I deeply disliked, and I'm not recapping a single moment of the story that features such, making it be two of the characters I give a damn about being mistreated throughout the film. But for Yugi, well, he wants to become a game developer in his own right, but he doesn't know what that game will be, and his capacity to think about that being constantly derailed by his yearning for Atem, who he can't get out of his head, which is hindering his own development. Intersecting into this is Diva, operating under the fake name Aigami, who is the central antagonist of the film, and his faction known as the Prana, who are manipulating the power of a previously unknown Millennium artifact referred to as the Quantum Cube, which allows them to warp reality. Or rather, it allows them to manipulate prana. And that is the backbone of how 4K Media royally screwed up their localization of the movie, as a lot of this movie is built on the backbone of understanding what prana is. Prana is a concept rooted, as said before, in Indian mythology. The word itself is Sanskrit, with a meaning of breath of life, describing a vital energy that permeates and suffuses reality. In Hinduism, the concept is further expanded upon, where prana itself is the cosmic background energy that fundamentally makes up the structure of the universe. And in certain theologies, prana is considered the primordial concept by which mana, aka magical energy, was derived. Or in other words, prana is the natural magical energy of the universe, also known as cosmic energy. And as we have discussed before, the manipulation and harnessing of cosmic energy has been a fundamental recurring background storyline throughout the Yu-Gi-Oh! Franchise in some way, shape, or form, with it revealed in Yu-Gi-Oh! Zell that the creator of the universe was number 100 Numeron Dragon, and all cosmic energy in the Yugioh universe was in turn the Numeron Dragon's own scattered life energy and magic. The reason why 4K Media screwed up the dub relating to this is they treat prana as in cosmic energy, and prana as in this faction as one and the same, them misromanizing the word as plana to dissociate it from this religious conceptual meaning. But in doing so, they and other people working on this script miss what was actually being done. For as prana is the cosmic energy that suffuses the universe, they miss that their manipulation of that energy allows these children, and those that are the victims of them, to transmute their bodies freely to and from a state of existing as cosmic energy, their quantum cube allowing them that free transition between states of existing as either matter or energy freely, those trapped in a state of energy, stuck as being part of a collective unconsciousness that is neither dead nor alive, and that energy then being used by those wielding the cube to then alter reality in ways that benefits them. Diva having been given the quantum cube by Shadi, who had rescued the various children who all have the natural ability to manipulate cosmic energy, aka their natural magic wielders, from abusive situations over untold years and taught them how to use their abilities, only for those abilities to be very limited over what they could actually do. And Diva being given the quantum cube by Shadi because of Shadi's own death at the hands of Yami Bakura, aka Zork, during Shadi's redistribution of the Millennium items that set the series' entire events in motion. For the quantum cube would only be free to manipulate the cosmic energy of the universe and alter the world freely once the 7 Millennium items had been used to revive Atem, and their power then depleted by sending Atem on to his rest upon his permanent defeat of Zork, as their power prevented other magical artifacts from freely manipulating cosmic energy as the quantum cube does. Or as I have stated in the past, and the 4Kids dub emphasized with its expository lore about Atem's role as Pharaoh, Atem's actions locked the power of magic away. You see how we came full circle with all of that? This is likewise why I keep framing Shadi as the true villain of the franchise, as despite Zork's role in it as the malicious spirit called into this world by the Millennium Item's creation, Shadi has been the one enabling or inciting all the subsequent malice seen through the abuse of these artifacts. Had he not done that, everything else would not have occurred. And Diva's use of the quantum cube in selfish, malicious ways forms the second, stronger backbone of the story, having it permit him and his allies to get close to Yugi, with intent to kill him due to his connection to Atem, as he believes that Yugi's desire to walk with Atem again will somehow sever the connection the quantum cube has with the cosmic energy of the universe, and prevent him from remaking the world the way he wants it to be, or ascend beyond the limits of this dimension, as was promised to him and the other prana users by Shadi himself, and the item being the means by which to open that way to a new world. Now one can think of Shadi speaking metaphorically. The ability to connect to one another will allow new doors of possibility to open, as we are all bathed in the light of truth that will lead to peace by no lies being capable of hiding truth in the shadows. But that's the problem of basing an entire ideology or explanation of a goal in just purple prose. If you attempt to interpret purple prose literally, it mangles the understanding of one's intentions, as those words are not clear with regards to that. And as a result, Shadi's created an entire cult of children that hate the world for the harm it's done them without allowing them to come to terms with that experience, and all hate Atem for the possibility that he may deny them the possibility of a better world. As if they fail at what they're doing, then what the fuck do they have to live for? And Seto's own inexplicable and unjustified pursuit of Atem is likewise a conflict point between him and Diva, as since Diva wants to maintain his power, Atem cannot be allowed to be called back to this world in any way, shape, or form. And thus, he interferes with Seto's recovery of the puzzle, treating the man as a villainous tyrant because Kazuki Takahashi does nothing but depict him as that, killing one of Seto's men before attempting to do the same to everyone else by assimilating them into the collective unconsciousness.
世界のあらゆる出来事は人間の集合意識が無意識下で脳内ネットワークを通じて決定している。つまりドミノ町で君が独裁者として君臨しているという事実が町の住人、果ては世界の人々の集合意識によって決定されている。
Or he could be the owner of a corporation that employs the grand majority of people who live there in some way, shape, or form. Corporate towns do exist after all.
君は支配者を演じさせられているに過ぎないのさ。全ての人間が同調し想像し得たいびつで愚かしい世界の均衡のためにね。
This entire speech operates under the presumption that free will is not a thing that exists, and I hate it. I don't care if it's being spoken by the villain of the film, and it's clearly meant to be Diva projecting his own mad ravings of an egotistical cult leader with a twisted perception of the world. It still epitomizes everything that is wrong about the popular depiction of Seto Kaiba. Seto resists their attempts to delete him from this world through just sheer force of will, unleashing his new dual disc system, as Diva attempts to force him to submit through the power of a dimension duel. The special duel rules the movie uses against Agami, basically screwing the rules of the entire card game for theatrical effect, which when paired with Seto's new augmented reality dual disc system that can create cards out of mere thought, just makes the actual duels of this film completely and utterly worthless. Like, by this point, we'd had 4 series where the games played in every episode could, with exception to anime effect differences versus the real printed cards and the occasional circumstance by which narrative magic created new cards in the blue, consistently keep to the rules of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Card game being played that were based upon Takahashi's original work. And yet, as I keep having to point out, Takahashi never seemed to be able to actually keep to his own damn rules. And the dimensional duels are another example of that, as the deciding factor to them through all these narratively magic-created cards is just willpower. And we already know that Seto has an iron will that keeps him on the path with no divergence. The only thing in the world that can trip him up being the safety of Mokuba. And yet, because the story hinges itself on him performing a collection of out-of-character actions and vilifying him for them, they're consequently presenting his unbreakable will as having been outright bent against itself. I genuinely hate Seto in this film. So it's a character I already dislike versus a character I'm being made to dislike with their argument rooted around the resurrection of a character I don't give a damn about. And as a consequence, I just don't fucking care. Now, I should note that Diva's cubic monsters are another citation of the references to Hinduism with the Prana plotline, themselves being based upon deities from that mythology. But again, it's very hard to care about them, especially since the archetype is basically unplayable. No, really, it's been 7 years since they were introduced, and I have never played against a single person that could actually get the archetype to work for them, including online. It's almost as if the special rules from the movie were done with explicit intent to actually make them a threat, especially with what was done for the other cards introduced in the movie. For really, the film benefited immensely from what Arc V was doing in lead up to it, with the Arc V booster packs and storyline granting to longtime players the first true legacy support cards for many of the game's longest lasting archetypes, which only received true archetype status thanks to those support cards. The Blue Eyes Dragons and Dark Magician being 2 of those thrust into that limelight at this point. Most prominently, the 2016 World Championships, where a Blue Eyes player won the entire tournament. The Arc V era really did have as its mandate the idea of making everything they possibly could become playable, whether you bought into the new card type and summoning mechanic or not. And the cards released as part of Dark Side of Dimensions for Yugi and Seto were among all of that. To an extent. Even now, Blue Eyes decks thrive upon cards first released for this movie. I can challenge meta-relevant decks with them and have a decent chance at winning as long as I don't brick my opening turn. And yet, a card game whose outcome is decided by willpower magically creating the card, the climax of the duel being Seto recovering a copy of Obelisk that they say was destroyed, narratively does not work, and makes their exchanges uninteresting as it's just compounding the root error about the duels in the franchise being overwhelmingly hard by them hinging on narrative magic. This is the same error in this movie that afterwards became one of the central things that entirely broke Yu-Gi-Oh! Brains. As the protagonist of that series, Yusaku, despite being given some of the most overpowered cards to ever be featured in the entire franchise, could not win a single duel in the story without relying on narrative magic powers in the same way Seto does right here. It actually, tangibly pisses me off to see this, as Seto is one of the characters in the original series where this was done the least with.
俺はオベリスクの効果発動バカだモンスター効果は無効モンスターではない神だゴッドハンドインパクト
Seto and Mokuba escape with the puzzle, making Diva become concerned that they will revive Atem, despite him no longer being in the puzzle. Them also retrieving from this the Millennium Ring, which somehow also has power still within it. How? Zork was exorcised from the Millennium items when he lost that last Shadow game. That was the entire point of it.
Magic!
Shut up, you weirdo.
Seto takes the puzzle to be assembled at his orbital elevator space station, and Kaiba Corp even having that is again an invocation of the technological discontinuity of this film. Like, do you all have any idea how genuinely difficult it is to construct an orbital elevator? We're still trying to figure out the materials technology that would allow us to even consider the possibility of construction, let alone the logistics of the manpower or the means by which to manufacture the components once we can figure out what would be able to work. In a near future setting like Gundam 00, where there's 3 of them, that's less of an issue, as it can be presumed to take place in an era where they figured that out, since the current engineering timeline for such is it should actually be possible in the next 200 years. Arc V, again, if this were following the alternate dimension plotline, would instantly handwave this entire matter as it's set that far in the future. But again, this movie is supposed to be operating off of manga continuity, where the tech level is not supposed to be significantly different from the late 1990s.
The mid-1990s was the era of your last so-called World War, the Eugenics Wars.
And since Kaiba Corp owns their own satellite network, what was wrong with just sending Seto up on his Blue Eyes White Dragon jet to a Kaiba Corp satellite to do this with just some rocket boosters? That there is viable materials technology that would make sense with the setting for him to have, as he did in the anime. Made worse is this is just so stupidly extra so Seto can have a computer do the work of rebuilding the puzzle, despite him declaring that he'd be the one to do so himself using his intellect that has to be better than the struggles of an 8-year-old boy that worked on it over the course of 8 years. But only finally started to figure the thing out after he turned 16. It's been 2 years since then. Kaiba as a whole is genuinely smarter, but handing it off for an AI to do it is going against what Seto himself said and who Seto himself is. And the entirety of the exchange that had taken AI in zero gravity 6 hours to figure out a solution is just dumb. Hell, when Konami and Bandai partnered to release an actual real-world reproduction of the Millennium Puzzle, it took me less than 2 fucking hours without any cheat instructions to do it. So I am apparently 3 times as intelligent as this supercomputer, as I did it 3 times as fast, without a zero-gravity environment as a cheat. Hell, 3D modeling technology doesn't require components be scanned in a zero-gravity environment to determine their geometry. You just measure the dimensions of the parts and run an algorithm. You can do that with a camera, or if need be, a flatbed scanner, and then throw it in a 3D modeling rig. Hell, I fucking did that when I pulled game sprites to build my Gate of Ouroboros broadsword. You know, this thing that I am really proud of? So, how long did it take Seto, or the people he employs, to program a computer to do this, when Seto is normally the kind of person to do things himself when they are personally important to him? Plus, the idea behind why the puzzle was so difficult to assemble wasn't that it was really, really hard, but it was the magic of the puzzle itself that was preventing itself from being assembled correctly. Yugi, through his years of forging a bond with it, and wishing for a bond connection, being what ultimately opened the door to him suddenly being able to solve it all in mostly one night, and why he was able to near effortlessly reassemble it when the Merrick-controlled Bandit Keith smashed the thing. Thus, once more, it wasn't a matter of intellect. Anyone should be able to do it if the magic of the artifact was not getting in the way. And it's not getting in the way now. Thus, if Seto believes magic is real enough that he believes a soul is held within the artifact, then logically he should have no problems doing such himself, without going so ridiculously fucking extra like this for no reason inside the narrative. It's at this point the character Sarah, who set off this entire plot with Seto in Transcend Game, approaches Yugi to warn him of what Diva is doing, explaining their backstory in relation to Shadi and the machinations he set in motion, as well as the source of Diva's grudge against them all. However, this exposition is really poorly handled, even in the uncut Japanese version of the film, and doesn't actually explain the specifics of why. It is just a broader hand-waving of their means and motivations, and takes up a scene that is shorter than the entire sequence of Seto going up to his freaking space station, despite this being more plot essential to not just explaining what the fuck is going on in the film, but expanding on the lore of the franchise.
あなたは私たちと同じ波動を持つ仲間。
Or, in other words, this film is saying Yugi canonically has magic which he couldn't access until the Millennium Items once more unlocked the ability for magic users to use magic with their destruction, which if this movie actually fit with anime canon, would then explain how Yugi sent Judai off to face his past self that still had a Tem during their graduation duel, or alternatively sent him to another dimension where the two had not parted ways yet, or possibly sent him briefly to the afterlife to face an attempt that was play acting. There are a lot of communal theories about what was up with the graduation duel. This is part of the frustrating thing about this movie, as while I hate the execution of the plot lines of it, the lore it expands on is consistent with everything else seen of the sequel series. But she offers him the chance to join them before it's too late, acting as an olive branch intended to assist in resolving Diva's grudge, giving him one of the missing pieces of the puzzle that Diva's managed to steal. This occurring at the same time that Diva is attempting to get revenge on Bakura, due to the spirit of Zork and the Thief King that killed Shadi after Bakura became their host. This was one of the things Takahashi was not able to elaborate on due to him cutting the original manga short, thus wanted to rectify it in some way in this film. Thus why Diva and the kids have the connection to Shadi that they do, to make giving that explanation story relevant. But all it really did in the end was further clarify that Shadi was the unaddressed villain, not truly loyal to Atem, but acting out of his own interests. The presumption before the film regarding Shadi was his actions were to free a suffering soul from his prison before that spirit lost all sense of self, and everything that was set in motion was done towards the intent of resolving their burdens so they could rest in peace. It's just the depiction of those actions in the manga and anime, and the consequences brought from them that made Shadi come off as more malicious than may have been intended. Then once more, the movie happened, and you have an entire cult Shadi raised, turning people into energy in order to power a reality-warping artifact that couldn't be used unless the Millennium Items were rendered inert, which these kids want to use to either rewrite reality or consume such as fuel to jump themselves to a paradise dimension, depending on which lines of dialogue are being stated. That consequently does not engender the benefit of the doubt towards his prior actions, that makes one default to assuming the worst of him. Nor is its depictions of the events of Bakura's role in the backstory any better. Bakura's father being a merchant of Egyptian artifacts that somehow knew of the Millennium Items and the tomb they were kept in, attempting to take the ring for his own through any means. And while yes, robbers straight up stealing artifacts from the country have been a thing, they're not the sorts of people who drag their children halfway around the world on a business trip in the fucking 1990s just to be taken to a tomb where their parents laugh maniacally over finding such an artifact and the chances of attaining it, only for the dark spirit that Shadi knows is in the damn thing to attack all of them, before hijacking Bakura himself to kill Shadi by throwing him into a wall. especially since from all appearances, it looks like Shadi had already been redistributing the items as it was. Seems like a very cheap means of killing a man, as I'm pretty sure the Thief King would have tried to do it with a knife. He likes knives. Granted, the problem with this version of the tale is it is all told from Diva's perspective, making the depiction be potentially the faults of an unreliable narrator, in contrast to what has been told about the origins of Bakura's possession of the ring before. In contrast to what has been told about the origins of Bakura's possession of the ring before, which, let's face it, he could have had his memories modified by Bakura to be remembering things differently, and the movie says as much. And with Diva's capability to manipulate people's perception and memories thanks to the quantum cube, he could be in this moment instilling into Bakura what Diva believes the version of these events were, to hold Bakura and his father solely responsible for something that was the fault of Zork and the Thief King. So, yeah, despite trying to tell the true story of the exchange between the Thief King and Shadi that killed the latter, it's not context clarification and lore expansion, but more acting as a retcon. A retcon that could be justified by Bakura's own memories of the event not just being suppressed, but also tampered with to think his dad just bought it from Shadi at random from a bazaar, as the anime depicted upon instruction from Takahashi originally. But it less serves a role in finally revealing the details as it would have were this flashback been given unprompted or at the beginning of the film, and more the source of Diva's own malice by his own distorted understanding of the events and the man that raised him. Worse, Jonochi is caught up in this, and to continue the film screwing him over, he's just thrown into a pocket universe where Diva's made it so no one can see him, as a means to sever his connection to all others. I don't even get what the point of this is, since there's a lot of metaphysical dialogue about how easy it is to screw with perception, so this happens in real life. And yet this is no different than a penalty game, where the penalty is Jonochi's mind being trapped in this simulation, described as being constructed by Diva's manipulation of the collective unconsciousness. Yet Diva treats it as all real due to the power he's gained from the quantum cube to literally teleport people into it. Because it's the quantum cube! It can do anything! Like, even disregarding 4K Media's localization changes, the film on its own, inside of its own story, is really bad at explaining what the collective consciousness it is using is supposed to be, and what Diva is purportedly manipulating through it, as it is glossing over a lot about the precepts of it, and how the collective consciousness itself is supposed to be a higher order dimension or plane of existence on its own, where you can interact with the dead because that is where dead souls purportedly return to after death, and then leave when they incarnate into the corporeal plane, which we presume Diva and his cohorts are purportedly trying to reach with how much they speak of it. So if they can go there freely and can manipulate it in the ways they are shown to instead of just becoming one with the universe, then what's the conflict in the film beyond this just being about Diva's own petty revenge?
Revenge, the most worthless of causes.
For if this is not what they're trying to achieve for themselves by denying attempts return and harvesting people's life force for them to go there, as they can already do that themselves by sending people there already, then what do they want? Moreover, if Diva is as informed about the collective consciousness as he claims to be, then he should have known what he did to Jonochi would fail, as the rules of this penalty are you are erased from existence if you have no connections to the collective consciousness in the world. But he only destroyed perception of Jonochi by the living, when the collective consciousness also encompasses the dead, and Jonochi's connection and memory of Atem was never severed, allowing him to escape. If Diva actually understood a damn thing about what he's preaching all film, he would know that. Thus, the problem with Diva as a villain in the film is the same problem that is being had with Kaiba all film long, as their purported motivations and actions are in conflict with what they should know and be capable of doing. Both of them are being chained and driven by the past when neither character contextually wants anything to do with their past. They want to set it aside and lay it to rest so they can move on. Hell, the film has to give Diva an entirely new means by which to incite the malice of his actions, that taking the form of the Millennium Ring, which had also been recovered from the tomb. And how it as well is still full of malice despite it having been exorcised of the evils that possessed it during the Millennium World arc by 5th King Bakura and Zork's defeat, and the depowering of the items to even permit the Quantum Cube to work. If it still has malicious power, then Diva's artifact shouldn't hold the power it does by the film's own rules. Seto then endangers his and Yugi's lives just to invite him to a new dueling event, with intentions for him to revive Atem, which once more doesn't make sense given everything we've discussed already, let alone the endangering of Yugi's life. Like, seriously, Seto almost got Yugi hit by Truck-kun, by which to fucking kill him. His purported motivations, he just finished explaining, are directly against this exact action. As if Yugi dies, there's then no way to revive Atem. So, by the movie's logic with Seto, Seto should want to protect Yugi's life with reckless abandon, instead of deliberately endangering him. It is literally impossible for Seto Kaiba to be this fucking stupid. Narratively, this is solely done so Sarah can save Yugi and beg him one last time to save Diva from his own malice. Which, again, there wasn't a need to villainize Kaiba against his own motivations to do that. Diva himself doing that by teleporting Yugi into traffic would have made more sense, and where he is in the story as a character. But in the scene right before this, Diva had somehow been captured by Seto, as he suddenly has a doohickey that can disable Diva's ability to manipulate the collective unconsciousness. You could have literally fixed this entire sequence of events by reversing the order in which they occur in. But speaking of that scene, even if you disregard the problem of this being another thing part of the tech disparity seen across the film, the time it takes Seto's men to put that magic-suppressing doohickey on him should have been more than enough for Diva to erase all the guards that apprehend him from existence thanks to how his powers work. Which brings us to the final act of the film, at Seto's dueling tournament to introduce the new version of Duel Disk that features the power of powered vision hologram technology that can have the images it creates have actual physical reality to them, which is, in fact, no different in any way from the solid vision with mass system that was introduced in Yu-Gi-Oh! Arc V, that is invented literally 100 years later. So, to repeat my earlier criticism that could have excused some of this film's nonsense, why was this not just officially just another AU dimension created from Arc V's world splintering? The speech here by Seto in its entirety is really good and supposed to be consistent with his character, that's why I've cited it before. Or at least it would be if it were not steeped in the hypocrisy that has been seen throughout the film, about him wanting to build the future where all boundaries and limits are broken, and one's own victory can be decided upon a fair and even playing field, but the actions in reaching towards that have, like everything else, been in contradiction to that goal. Made worse by how Diva's holding that last piece of the puzzle hostage, which Seto then allows Diva to set up a dimensional duel that leaves every single person in the arena to be held hostage as consumable material. Seto betting everything on Yugi having the same desire as him and wanting Atem's revival to recover the last piece from Diva, which is simultaneously exceedingly reckless and yet a very safe bet, what with Yugi being the one who defeated Atem. Again, why is Seto just not challenging Yugi? Atem canonically got all of his dueling knowledge and skill from Yugi. Yugi is presented as the competent one of the game of the two. Why are they not just the ones playing?
僕は一人のデュエリストとして君に挑戦する。
残念だが俺の倒すべき相手は貴様ではない。
Yugi easily beats Diva and his purported false future that they only can achieve due to Diva's obsession with the past. And then Yugi denies Seto his seeking of the past by putting together the puzzle and having nothing happen, with Yugi telling Seto, the one who is supposed to seek the future, that he needs to stop seeking the past, as it is his duty to build the future, which, if nothing else, would have been the breaking point for this movie, as it entirely denied what the film needed to do. So as I said earlier, the film could have fixed a fair amount of its story with just one fundamental change to it that would have better respected the characters. And this is the point where it's more poignant than any to say it. Why is Yugi the one telling Seto that he can't chase the past? Why is it not the reverse? Why is it not Seto saying that to a Yugi who yearns for a Tem? Because the entire movie long, it should have been Yugi that is having difficulty moving on without the comforting presence of a Tem with him. Yugi that is haunted and reminded by it and struggling to maintain the confidence to live his life without the things and the person that are now gone. He is the one that needs to be told this, and Seto is the perfect person to not only tell him this, but be the forceful hand that slaps him out of second-guessing himself in his own way so Yugi can seek his own future as well. Yet that is not what the movie does. And because it doesn't, it's why it feels like the film is rolling an idiot ball, because Takahashi refused to write Yugi as a character with the conflict in his character he was struggling to overcome. Hell, the entire plot line regarding Seto recovering the Millennium Items itself could have been salvaged had, say, Yugi's own confidence at living without a Tem been shattered if Seto had invited Yugi to a new tournament, they faced each other, and Seto crushed him with zero effort as Yugi started hesitating and second-guessing himself in the moment. Which would have left Yugi stuck on what would a Tem do that would be staggering his own capacity to be independent. You could have even opened the film that way to set off the subsequent arcs, making Yugi backslide for understandable reasons and come to think he can't do anything on his own, and Seto acting to make amends by recovering the puzzle to show that it should not matter, or otherwise trying to bring back the version of Yugi that is his insurmountable challenge, possibly because he believes beating Yugi by such a curb stomp is not the fair victory he's always wanted. Or alternatively, make Seto believe that the true person that was his rival was a Tem, when it wasn't, and Yugi without him is just a fake, which is a better incitement for him into the actions he takes than the movie pretends to give. For after all, what point is building a better future when there is no challenge left to strive to overcome? As if there is nothing to surpass or move beyond, all that's left in the future is nothing but slow stagnation, as the evolution of the future should bring just outright ends. It should be Seto that is imparting this wisdom on to Yugi, as Seto is a person who lives and thrives on that philosophy, and that would act as a means to show that at the end of everything, he was just trying to help him as a friend. For if Seto is to never win against Yugi or a Tem, that should legitimately be the reason, because Seto self-sabotages himself so he always has that one thing, that one person that he will always strive for, the undefeated rival that drives him to be better, and who themselves becomes better in response. And because the movie does not do this, that the central sins that damn the film are caused, and everything related to Seto becomes overtly toxic. All because Kazuki Takahashi could not stop writing Seto as a contrarian antagonist that must be forcibly placed in the wrong, no matter how much it is against his character to do what he does. He never let the relationship between the two characters evolve into the realm of being friends or respectful rivals, despite the forging of bonds and connections being one of the fundamental principles of this franchise due to it not being possible to play a two-player game alone. He always writes Seto as going too far with whatever he is chasing, and Yugi has to condemn him for whatever he's done, even when Seto may have acted in the right in these circumstances as the pragmatist as was seen throughout the anime. And once more, why I feel the anime version of the Millennium World arc handled this better is Seto accepted that he would never be able to beat a Tem and let him go because Yugi would still be there to challenge throughout his life until the point he himself died and could finally face off against a Tem beyond death's door. All Seto had to do was wait and become better until that day finally came, while following the path he had carved out for himself in seeking a better future. And then this movie happened, where Seto devolves into a petulant child that refuses to wait, and consequently plays part in almost damning all existence solely because no one told him that the damn thing's empty. Great job at character assassination there. But because Diva thinks that Atem's revival is at hand, he embraces the evil of the Millennium Ring to give him the power to just wholesale erase reality, consuming it to create a new world from the components, but now tainted openly with Diva and the Ring's malice. And as a consequence of this, to prevent the collapse of the entire world, we toss in a Deus Ex Machina no Jutsu. Atem being summoned back to the world to deal with the mess caused by everyone trying to revive him. Which again, isn't the way I feel the story should have been resolved. For not only did it make every contemptible thing Seto did right by even recovering the Millennium Puzzle to counter this threat, despite everything wrong about his actions, and really, there's another better way to have handled this as magic must defeat magic. The entire reason for Diva even erasing people to begin with was out of his fear of Atem being recovered and his vengeance on Bakura for something he was not responsible for. Had he done nothing from the start, not only would this movie not exist, but he and his friends would have been able to have gotten what they wanted by ascending to a higher plane of existence, as it was Diva's obsessions that were holding him back. Thus, to make his actions the entire reason why Atem is revived, is to make him losing his own goal his own fault. That would normally be karmic irony, which is normally a good way to handle a villain losing, but is once more held up by a simple question the movie does not ever answer. Why not just tell Yugi about this, and ask him to not act to revive Atem? Because as much as Yugi misses him, and should be shown as having problems with him moving on, the entire point of the ceremonial duel in the first place was to lay Atem to rest. Reviving him after the fact and bringing him back in any way, shape, or form defeats the purpose of that act, and Yugi knows this. So if Senna or Diva ever just approached Yugi and told him about their goals of moving to another world, and asked him straight out, all Yugi would have to say is, yes, and the entire conflict of the film evaporates as Yugi would not be used to revive Atem. But the movie doesn't do that, as it has to make a villain out of Diva, so he has to believe that Yugi would want Atem back. It essentially becomes the plot of Star Trek Insurrection, where the entire thrust of the film, an antagonism between two factions, is caused by no one asking a simple question. This is also why the film has Seto performing all the antagonistic actions he does, because it cannot be Yugi that is in the wrong. It cannot let Yugi be the one that wants Atem back. And yet the entire conflict of the film hinges itself on the question of whether that is what Yugi himself actually wants. By Takahashi's refusal to let Yugi have this character flaw that would be natural in him missing someone he literally had his soul bonded to, every other consequential sin of the film is narratively caused, as it is working itself backwards from the premise that it cannot be Yugi that wants this. And yet if Yugi wanted Atem back despite having let Atem go, that then creates the conflict between him and Diva that drives Diva as far as he goes. That incites Seto to perform the actions he commits out of a misguided sense of helping. That helps Yugi come to his ultimate decision and the means by which to absolve Diva's malice, by showing it is Diva's own obsession that corrupts him. And it would likewise resolve the conflict if it was just them, Seto and Yugi, and no one else that truly defeats the threat of the Millennium Items together without needing to call Atem back, so they can truly seek a better future without the sins of the past weighing upon them or overshadowing the future. Instead of them praying to the person who has taken the position of Osiris, being called down from his throne in the afterlife, to once more deal with a threat in the modern era, and in one attack entirely destroy their dreams before leaving this realm of existence for good. With that, Diva's connection to the collective unconsciousness is severed, Yugi and company graduate, Yugi himself deciding to take a job offered at Industrial Illusions working on the Duel Monsters card game, while he works to develop his own game, as everyone else goes their separate ways. And Seto himself uses the quantum cube with his own technology to send himself to the afterlife to finally challenge Atem to one final duel. And this ending had quite a bit of backlash to it, with Seto appearing to literally commit suicide over his obsession that Kazuki Takahashi had to himself illustrate a postscript image intended to be canon that showed Seto and Yugi playing the game Yugi ultimately invented, set 4 years after this movie. Because, oh my, did this film join those anniversary events that got a lot of people angry. Which is really the disappointing thing about all of this, for as much as the franchise is about how the bonds people help them to overcome adversity in their lives, this movie isn't really about how bonds hold us up, but tear us down. The connection to a town is strangling the life out of the characters who least want to seek the past. While the character who was previously holding the connection closest to his chest is now all about the future and not considering that bond at all? No. Fuck no. In simplest principle, this is not what should have been done and is in fact the reverse. This film ruins Seto's character, and I spent literal years raging against this in the videos I was making about the franchise to present that exact thing. As for why this was so personally offensive to me, well, it's not because of the money I've spent over the years on the frickin' card game. No. It's because it acts in rejection of the very principles I had internalized from the original story and its successors about connections and bonds, and how they should and do make us better. Because I built some amazing connections and bonds with friends. People I would not have gotten the time to know without the card game that Kazuki Takahashi created spun out of his manga. My friends in middle school, high school, college, and ones online that all liked, played, and enjoyed this game. I first met and became close to my roommate Alexis, who I eventually moved in with and helped her through her sex transition because we both liked the game, and did a bunch of dual streams just screwing around having fun. And the closure for the franchise's original story would have had no better ending than allowing that to happen for the characters themselves in the canon animated experience. Not just a postscript where it's implied they finally reached that point, but never actually bothers to show it once. That's what pisses me the most off. They could have had everything involved in that, and it was wasted. For with Kazuki Takahashi's death last year, it is an inevitable fact that we will never see it happen. And that's a depressing thought, as Konami the last several years has not been good for this game with their actions and releases. I generally don't spend much time at all supporting it anymore, because I can't waste my time trying. And likewise after Vrains, I cannot find the will to invest my time at all in the anime, regardless of how well I hear the newer series have handled themselves. And yet, as mad as this movie makes me, I can't deny the part in my life this franchise has played for the good it did. And that's what's so viscerally disgusting about bad continuations, as all the good the original brought to us just gets thrown out the window. And yet, I've kept my cards. I've kept the items and trinkets of the franchise around, because it is more than just the original series that's ruined because of the film. It's more than any of the sequels. It's an experience in and of itself to engage with other players as a player. And even as Konami continues to make the game awful by the mistakes it refuses to fix, I can still pull out my old decks at any time and go over to someone I know isn't a shithead about playing to see if they want to have a match and gain a good new experience from it. And ultimately, that's something a shitty movie that was later formally made non-canon can't take away from me. For if nothing else at the end, when we finally once again have fair play, we will see a fair duel. I'm Shinta, and I'll see you all around.